Hey everyone, Juan here. Welcome to SQL Lingua Franca, the podcast about analytics that reveals what the documentation does not cover.
SQL Lingua Franca. Bio.
Today, we have Mariam, one of my colleagues that works in the data strategy cell. We're going to talk about the responsible use of AI on both a global scale, but also some very tangible things that your organization can do to make AI better. Mariam, would you like to start by introducing yourself?
Good day, Juan. Good to be here. Very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Well, as a person, I would consider myself quite multicultural. I was born in Armenia. I grew up for quite large part of my childhood in Russia, in Moscow, and then I moved to the Netherlands when I was 15. And ever since in the Netherlands, which is almost 20 years. So culturally, I would really call myself a hybrid. And I'm a mom of two. I like to dance, and I found a big passion and purpose in the work that I do on responsible AI. I think that would be it in a nutshell. Yeah.
Interesting. So that's already a really good bridge to tell us a little bit more what you do here at Xebia.
I started off in econometrics, so quite a technical study, and actually rolled into data science. And from that point on, it's always been consultancy and it's always been data. It's just moved up more towards strategy. So at Xebia, I'm one of the data and AI strategy experts. So basically what we help organizations to make their next stage in their data-driven maturity. But in that process, when I discovered the passion for responsible AI, which also happened prior to me joining to Xebia, it was actually quite a conscious choice doing it in a strategy, because strategy is the place to do it with the C-level stakeholders. When you determine the data and AI strategy, there's also certain questions that you want to ask and determine your organizational ethical compass and the principles that needs to be carried by the organization as a whole. So it was quite a conscious consideration to go for strategy where it begins to spread that awareness of adopting AI responsibly.
Maybe for those of you listening, can you tell us what are some of the biggest problems with doing AI responsibly?
Biggest problems with doing it responsibly?
No, sorry. What happens if you don't?
So there's a bigger picture and a more there's a bigger picture, I think, that affects, let's say, all of the world, and there are also more smaller pictures, more focused in and scoped at the clients. So if I take it the bigger picture, you have some examples that have been done in the past, and now we see the consequences of them that were not intended. For example, social media. I think when Facebook came along, we were super excited because you could connect with your, old classmates, even like all the way from Russia. For me, then at least, it was really like a truly globalization has taken place. There was a lot of fun. And then you see that, the business model behind it, the created consequences that it created now, when you see, that you show whatever is most viral, not necessarily what's true, all the way towards the depression rising amongst teenage girls. There's a plethora of examples there. But that's more of an example happened in the past, continuing now, which we still haven't been able to solve. On top of that, you have current issues that worry me more, like... for example, the fact that if somebody really wants, they could make a pornography out of me, out of my picture, whenever they want to, and that really affects somebody, whether they realize it or not, or that somebody can call up my mom with a deepfake scam, and those are the issues that are happening now. And if you continue down that path, continue down this, let's say, race to deployment in general, then there are some potential future scenarios that might worry me. So not necessarily the fact that technically AI is going to be smarter than us, is going to destroy us. Now, I'm not so much into that scenario per se. I'm more worried about the social system it gets embedded to if we don't do it responsibly. So see it a bit as a, what are the vulnerabilities in our society that we're going to expose with new technology that are going to undermine all the benefits that we actually want to get out of from that. Because, we do all want those benefits, but we need the good foundation too.
I know you have been involved with this topic for quite a while now, even before the big post-corona generative AI boom.
Yes.
Do you still remember what was the incident or the thing that made you believe, wow, this is going to be a big topic and I want to be a part of it?
Yes, and it was not even like, whoa, this is going to be a big topic. It was really an heartfelt emotion that I felt like this is really triggering some emotion for me. Like I could not understand how come we let this happen. And I think the initial click, it was, I think, 2020 or so, a bit before, and I listened to a podcast. It was by Tristan Harris and Daniel Schmachtenberger back then in the Joe Rogan podcast version. And that podcast just was it kind of articulated really well all that I was feeling prior to that, all coming from the Social Dilemma movie. And I felt like, if I'm feeling so much around this topic, maybe I should do something with that. Maybe there's something for me there. And that exploration started. And then before I knew, we're here now.
Oh, interesting. You have to send me that one. I will definitely put it in the comments of this video.
I think it is a bit outdated in the sense that a lot happened since then, but there's still some very great examples mentioned.
Yeah, for sure. Even I still remember some of the data science tutorials I used to follow in 2017, and we're talking about scikit-learn and some stuff, and it's like the world has changed so much in, I don't know,
such a short time compared to previously. And I think that's also the thing, the exponentiality of it, we don't always realize. I think we tend to go back to our more linear way of thinking. But I
have a spicy question. And when you were talking, I remember I was also very fond of Facebook at the beginning, of reconnecting with people. And of course, I was much, much younger, but I didn't think that a lot of bad things were going to come. And now in hindsight, we realize, a lot of bad stuff is happening here. Maybe the question is, do you think the people that invented Facebook could have predicted all of the chaos that was going to come? They should have been a bit more proactive.
I don't know if they really could have predicted. Maybe at some point they could have predicted earlier than general population. But I think the initial intention is not bad at all. Nobody intended to actually create something that would, polarize people or disturb the shared sense of reality, you name it. But yet it happened. And I think the reason that it happened is because there are a lot of consideration has been taken along the way that are less conscious, that are less, let's say, considering the full spectrum of perspective, like what does it actually mean? And are really focused on the fact, hey, we have a model that we earn that's our business model, we earn our money by it, and let's optimize for it. And not thinking slightly bit further, like, okay, if I optimize for that, what does it actually mean in the long run? That question feels to me, hasn't been answered. Or maybe, but I don't think they even got there, to be honest. I just think they were focused. Like, I'd like to think about that it's not necessarily that people did it on purpose, but it's more like incompetence. But maybe, truth is we will never know.
Fair, because how I see it, you have two options. Either you're constantly going to look for what's happening in other companies and what are the biggest oops that they do in the space of data science, and then you try to correct those in your company, which is a pretty reactive approach. Or what some people advocate is to stop, to think about this much, much better and try to be more proactive towards AI. How do you feel about those two stances?
I think one of them is more like the creating of illusion that we're doing this safe, because I think Facebook did a very good job at that. But if you drill down, in my understanding, a big of their AI safety budget is coming from their PR budget. While you could think, if you set it up in a way that's really coming from your core budget, it really needs to be a core principle embedded in your system. That costs much more money to do so. So especially if you're pioneering in a field, it's very easy to take that route because, you're one of the first. So then you see also a bit faster the exploitation gap there exists, and you're ahead of it, right? So you still can. So that's a bit a tricky question. I don't even know if we would have done the same if we would be in that situation, because then you really are tested by life on your own moral compass and values. Everybody can say they're the best at this, but once it's there, then you actually know. So it's in that sense, it's a tough one to crack. But I think, in general, just want to bring a bit of awareness. What does that mean? Because you affect so many people. You carry a responsibility there. And that's something I would want to see. The fact that people are like, hey, let's own this responsibility because we're actually affecting the whole world with the information that we're spreading or whatnot.
Yeah, for sure. Of course, there are some people that are just like super evil and that's that, and maybe they're beyond saving. But a lot of people are, I think, not even conscious of what's the worst that can happen with the solutions that we're constantly implementing.
Yeah, so an example could be, if you extrapolate that a bit, you have the, for example, we have now the personal assistant in your pocket, and the personal assistant in your pocket knows more and more about you. You converse with that, you can share emotional things. I think a lot of conferences point out a lot of different effects, but nobody talks about relationships and how it can affect relationships. We already have now a whole generation of kids growing up with parents with their nose in the phones. And so if I extrapolate that, if you have your personal assistant, you have an emotional relationship with that personal assistant, even though you already have some ideas of AI girlfriends and boyfriends. What if that thing that you converse with knows everything about you, with that business model still very subtly pushing you some type of marketing and you don't even realize it, or very subtly pushing you an ideology and you don't even realize it? These are the things that worry me more. That would be a potential worst case scenario. Maybe not worst, but one of the bad cases, let's say.
That's very interesting, because I realized that in the future, companies like it's going to be like maybe Alexa and Siri, the ones that are doing the counsel therapy. Yeah,
you already have examples of that. I think it was Esther Perel, the relationship therapist, that she was so fully booked. And then this guy came with his example, I created my own Esther Perel, and he had trained her on all the previous things. But I think that's also the tricky part, right? Because an actual professional is much more adjustable to the right context and not just trained on everything in the past. So it's, true. Those examples already exist. So this is the scary part.
Oh, that's insane. I think we could go through this rabbit hole and then make the whole podcast about like how horrifying things are.
No, let's not go there.
Maybe for the people listening, I know many of us are feeling like, okay, but that's when you have a company that is like Google level or Facebook level.
Yes.
What's the worst that can happen in a more middle-sized or smaller company using AI?
Yeah, so also provided their maturity level, right? What's the worst that can happen? A big chunk of it would be a collapse of reputation and trust of your customers in your organization, right? You've seen a couple of examples there as well, especially if you serve customers, like the example of Canadian Airline, I think, things like that. You don't realize, if you don't do it well, you don't realize the value that it's promising and the actual benefit that it's promising. But you might actually have a big reputation scandal on your neck. I think with the current maturity level, most of the cases are around that. And it's also, we can get very, philosophical and indeed maybe worst case scenario, what's possible in the future. But I felt like there's already so much going on right now that we still haven't solved. So I already had to think for myself, like, the problem is so big, it's naively to think that I myself can solve it, but it's too big. So what is my niche that I can actually focus on, that I feel that I have certain control over? And then I felt like if I'm advising C-level stakeholders on how to set up their data and AI strategy and how, become more data-driven, it is actually my responsibility to advise them to do it responsibly and own that. Yeah.
So one of the reasons I was excited to have you here is I know there are plenty of people that can implement AI or like traditional machine learning, And there are plenty of people that are aware of the problems that can be caused by using AI responsibly. But I think you have two things that differentiate it. And the first one is you actually help companies build propositions and actually give them very tangible feedback on how to do it. So maybe the first thing I would like to know is, let's say that a company hires you and says, hey, help us do AI more responsibly. The first task is going to be to come here and assess how badly we're doing. More or less, what are the things that you look for?
I think initially for me, it starts with guiding principles. Like, do you know as an organization what is your acceptable standard? Because, you know, we are all ethicists. We all have a moral compass, and an organization also has it. And usually it's tied to your values and mission and vision, etc., but mainly values, right? What are your core values as an organization? To be able to answer it as an organization, you need to at least know it for yourself as an individual. But so that's usually that definition of defining your guiding principles or defining your organizational ethical compass. That's where it starts. And we do that with top-level stakeholders first. So it's like a two-phase workshop setup that we do. But then let's say output of that stage would be a set of guiding principles. And some of them can be very standard. There's a set that is standard for like, you know, transparency or fairness, things like that. But there's also a set that's very tailored to organization. Like, let's say if you're very much into being inclusive organization and promote diversity, yeah, then definitely your AI solution needs to be also inclusive for all of its users, for example. Yeah.
Okay.
So that's usually where it starts.
So you start by putting all of your principles in paper?
Yeah. It would be like I don't want to say it North Star, but that would be like, these are the principles that guide us. And then, okay, how do we embed those in your organization, right? Like, how do we actually implement this? Then you have let's say, implementation phase, and it's twofold because you have actual technical implementation, right? So that's, think about things like the CI/CD pipeline, everything along the CI/CD pipeline, there's things you could do at each step, and it is a loop. It's a continuous process in a way. But also, if you look at it from a use case perspective, then you're from ideation all the way to industrialization and maintenance, there are also some things you could do and questions to be asked at ideation, like, should we be doing this? But in the maintenance, there may be more different types of questions you would ask yourself. That's the technical, like, embedding, but there's also an organizational implementation, like, okay, that very tightly relates also to data management and data governance in a way. So do you have like a multidisciplinary team doing use case assessments? You know, they can do the things related with data governance, but they might also be able to do it with regards to like some ethical considerations, because it's also a multidisciplinary team. If it's a startup, it might look slightly different. You know, so there's also a lot of variations there. And then after you've embedded it, like you did the technical implementation, then it's the question like, okay, how do we actually manage it? How do we make sure that we maintain it properly? So then it's more really about AI governance, feedback loops, mechanisms, but also things like policy creation, because I noticed many times people like to start with policy and then try to implement the policy. But it feels to me that policy is something that you would like to, it's like documenting stuff the way you do, so that it, you know, meets each other in a way. So you have your principles, those determine a lot of your policy, of course, but you know your policy best once you've done the process, because it can be that in the process, in actual technical embedding, some things are different than you expected, like it usually is. So the policy might change from that, and then it would be, I think, less pragmatic to do it the other way around. So I'm more of a favor of writing it down in the policy after you did the embedding. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I can imagine it's tricky because let's say that in our organization, we only care about diversity.
Yeah.
How do you operationalize what exactly that means and how that translates to technology?
But do we, so to just give you an example, I had lately, I think, a client that did a pilot of like a generative AI pilot, and they did it based on public data. And now they wanted to add more sensitive data to it, and they wanted to do it responsibly. So that was the step that they approached me to start off with this framework. And then you actually take that specific use case at hand as the actual case that you go through. And then, okay, if you would enrich this with the sensitive data, what effects that might have, and that you do in a multidisciplinary team with privacy people, with security people, with data, like a mixture. And that brings out to light your ethical dilemmas relevant to your organizations. What are the questions that are arise and that you cannot answer, right? Some of them are really dilemmas because a dilemma puts you like on the spot. You cannot actually make a decision. You don't want to. So these tensions you want to bring out so that you can take them towards the upper management and really work through to make them into your principles.
Okay, so it's more like starting with a use case, focus on the details, and then slowly zoom out until you have.
I would say the implementation is still very much use case based approach. That's why I think it's very well to be combined with data management initiatives or data governance initiatives. Yeah.
That's interesting. Maybe another interesting thing is who is responsible for this? Is it the employees, the big company, the government?
I think in a bigger picture, I would say, just like we're very much with a product, like that you get liability if you design a product that is malfunctioning as an organization. I think in a bigger picture, the company should be the organization that is developing, that is making that product for other people to use, is liable, is accountable for that. But to zoom it down a bit, you have, of course, an end-to-end development team that develops the AI solution. But it's not only the development team that is responsible for it. It's also it's a multidisciplinary team. It's also the data management people. It's also the privacy people. It's also the security people. It's like everybody that is in that multidisciplinary team specifically for that solution, that they're making this consideration, designing the policy around that use case, designing the process and the guardrails and whatnot. That whole team is end-to-end responsible, and the different parts of that responsibility lie with different discipline. And then
It sounds to me that if a company doesn't ensemble the right team, they're already doing something wrong. Like you forget to involve legal, or you forget to involve something.
I think that's the trickiest.
Who's your ideal team of responsible? Who are the Avengers in a company of responsible AI?
I like how you put it. It's indeed a la Avengers bit. Depends a bit on your use case, of course, and the business a company is doing, but definitely business domain knowledge is needed. The actually, use case owner, the one that is behind that idea. The relevant security person, the relevant privacy person, if it contains personal data, of course, if it's we take potentially very high risk situation, right? But also data governance, if it exists. So it actually boils down to, a lot of it boils down to having a proper foundation. Like if you don't even have data management, and you also see it in legislation. Like you cannot, if an AI Act, if you have a high-risk system and you want to be compliant with the AI Act, you need a proper data management. It's one of the requirements, by the way. So it's it's so codependent that it's, I don't think it costs, if you think about it separately, now I have privacy by design, I have now GDPR, now we have AI Act, and now we have data if you look at them as separate initiatives and have the separate streams with separate budget, the chances are they won't communicate with one another. A lot of it can be embedded in, one set of processes because a lot of it has a lot of overlaps and connections with one another. It's just knowing when to put on the right people. Yeah.
So it's true that for some companies it feels like you're trying to do an Ironman when you're still having trouble finishing a 5K. Or you're trying to shoot a rocket launcher when you still don't know how to use a gun properly, type of situation.
Something like that. Yeah, I think, and the data management, I think, is the big foundation because everybody wants to do it. It feels to me like, I think, I mentioned this before, like a Jenga metaphor, right? We all want this high tower of AI benefits, but do we want it by taking out things from the bottom and putting them at the, it's not, this basic hygiene of foundation, you need to have that. And then there's also like a last step. So you did the implementation and you did the governance and the management. And you also have a step where you look at more like, let's say, benchmarking and improvement. So it is an iterative process. So you want to have a look back, what went wrong, what went good, how can we make it better next time? So you want to measure somehow there, like, where are we now? How do we do better with the next iteration? So it involves very much like things like KPIs and assessments to where you stand, but also benchmarking with regards to your peers in the industry. So right now it's very early in the shoes. There are very few that are. I think banks are usually at step of AI governance, while most of our organizations are trying to define their principles. But yeah, if you're a bit farther than that, I can imagine that there will be a certain standard for financial industry, a certain standard for life sciences, and so forth. That will arise as well.
It's interesting because the companies that you were describing as in having their data management and all of the bases like very well covered, they generally tend to be companies that are a bit avoidance of taking big risks. So that leads me to think, okay, which are the type of companies that right now are excelling at doing AI and especially doing it responsibly?
I think a lot of it is still tied to regulation. And I think that's also what I see. Most of them enter because of the regulation and because of the compliance. It's more that triggers the urgency to do it right.
No.
And of course, you want to inspire people to have it because it's a good foundation, because it's your foundation for trust, first of all. But also because I always used to say, regulation is the lowest bar of ethical behavior. Any lower and you're punished by law. So you want just inspire for them to just do the right thing, because you also carry that responsibility to co-creating where are we going with this, I think that's underestimated a bit, that there are more benefits to doing it responsibly than just compliance, but they're less tangible. So now I'm thinking, how can we make it actually more tangible?
Yeah, fair. I think as a consultant, I'm being super lucky that I worked in industries that have nothing to lose and maybe were a bit unethical, but also heavily regulated industries. And you really see the differences. Like, being open to innovate at any cost doesn't necessarily mean that you're doing data better.
Yeah, and it also doesn't have to be in a way of your innovation, because I think we're thinking a lot in terms of limitations, but you really think like that gives you a bit of the, let's say, framework within which you can color. And I think that framework makes sense a lot of the time. But you have a lot of freedom to still be innovative. Like if you put, like, let's take a car example, for example, because when I think the seat belts came on, everybody's like, yeah, that's gonna, I think that's the argument for innovation. Like anything that's trying to come regulate, like, okay, seat belts are now going a mandatory thing. Oh, that's gonna, be in a way of innovation. It wasn't in a way of innovation. What happened is that safety got a bit the more focus, and safety was in the forefront and it got improved. And then cars are still innovative, It hasn't changed. So I do believe similar thing can hold here. So it doesn't need to be in a way of innovation. It's just give the safety focus first.
And talking about cars, I know this is something that maybe you haven't discussed yet, but I'm curious. What do you think about self-driving cars?
What do I think about self-driving cars? I think, the idea might seem nice. Yeah, the execution is still a long way to go, and I think there's the root of it still has to do with the fact that we don't fully understand how human consciousness works. Like, we all have acknowledged that it exists. Everybody knows, like, I have that subjective experience and I am a conscious person. Everybody knows that for themselves, and we know that from each other as a species. But when you really drill down to science, there is no consensus. So, in a way, we also don't know fully ourselves yet in that. And I think that also has a that's rooted in the way we drive car, or in the way we as humans do things. So it's not just and all intelligence. There's a bit more to it, and we cannot pinpoint it. Yeah.
Because for me, I don't know if self-driving cars are safer than humans, or if they will be in 5 years, or in 10 or 20, doesn't really matter. I think as humans, we will never be able to get over our need to have somebody to blame when things go wrong.
Well, I think that's kind of brings me to the fact of the responsibility, because to me, responsibility has to do a lot with ownership. And that's so very much also on the individual level that I'm extrapolating to the collective. So a part of my own maturity process was, in a way, I own myself, but not only, you know, the things I like about myself, but things I like less about myself. Let's say my shadow, in a way. So you can, you know, somebody comes with feedback, you can be, oh, I'm a victim, it's because this. It's the easy way. And most of the people actually go there because it's such pre-programmed thing to do. It's much harder to be like, hey, wait a second. Maybe, just maybe, there's a little truth of what you're saying, because, yeah, you have your perspective, and it's, you know, context and perspective anyway. So not to say that you should agree with it, but to be open for the fact that, hey, I actually may have something to learn here. Let me listen and try to understand the other person. That's basis. And it's funny because now it gets a bit philosophical, but if you extrapolate that, that's essentially what's happening, because all these questions that you need to ask yourself for implementing AI responsibly, they're like a bit itchy and icky, and you're like, yeah, I just want to use the technology. It's so cool. Why do I have to go answer these questions? Like, it doesn't feel like it. Let's just put them under the rug and hope they will disappear, like we do in real life when we deal with our own shadow, you know?
Yeah.
And then at some point it does come bite you back, you know, that's, yeah.
In a similar line, I think a lot of people take a lot of comfort in not knowing how AI works, because that gives them
Ignorance
that
is a
takes away
bliss.
some of the responsibility of things going wrong.
Ignorance is a bliss, but then you're, you know, you're blissful in a fool's paradise. I think one of the Russian literature geniuses said that. But that's essentially, yes. So, yeah, you could say, I see it a lot with my mom also, like, yeah, I'm too old for this, I'm not going to dive into it. Yeah, you can take that stance, but then you should also accept the fact that you will probably end up in one of the exploitation gaps, because the technology is not going to wait for you to catch up. It's just moving on.
What do you mean by that?
So, in general, I think technology tends to go towards where the law isn't yet. So there's always going to be an exploitation gap of either people that are, you know, on the forefront and people that are trying to catch up and cannot, or people that are using it as intended and people that are misusing it. And yeah, if you're not catching up, if you don't know, yeah, then you will also not know that if your daughter calls you, that it might be a deepfake scam, you know? Yeah.
So there is some responsibility in knowing how it's being used.
Yeah.
And especially like knowing which parts are not regulated just yet.
Yeah, well, knowing that it can also be misused, right? It's too, like, sure, we can make all this cool AI art, right? It's very nice, but we can also create deepfakes that undermine, you know, the sense of reality, what's true and what's not. Or, we can cure cancer maybe and have new drugs, but okay, we teach the machine biology, like biological language, but can also have an exposure that everybody can, have access to biochemical, creation of potential biochemical weapons or something like that. So these are the things that, you know, at the border, you have a lot of examples. I think a lot of immigrants are like AI test subjects. You know, you think like robot dogs, surveillance, AI towers, things like that. So there's so much.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy.
You mentioned two domains that I really want to tackle individually. The first one is like arts, and the second one is military. Let's start with arts.
Okay.
What do you think about AI used to replace actors, musicians, and all of these jobs, really?
Yeah, I'm not. I don't think it will truly replace. But again, I don't know. I'm not an artist. But to me, for example, that value of original Van Gogh doesn't diminish because AI can, create something. Yeah, it's still like when you go to the Van Gogh Museum, you look at his art and the emotion that actually speaks to you. I don't think AI. Maybe it could, but right now it doesn't feel like it would have been the same. But if we're going more towards more digital art, maybe it's just a new way of working together with AI to create new art, maybe other, it's still about, you could use AI to create all these little sub pieces and be the one that coordinates to bring it together in one bigger piece. I don't know, like there are many variations how you could think about that.
Yeah, I think for some people it's more like AI is a new tool, just like when they invented a certain type of brush. It's like,
Yeah.
or when they invented autotune, like this is a new tool and you have to get used to it. But at the same time, also part of me is like, oof, but these people, like, they're really going to have to rethink how their careers work.
Yes.
Or where are the risks that, well, most of the art that we consume is not going to be made by a human. And you mentioned kind of like the motion and the, but I also think they can use AI to make things that really transmit emotion and that maybe sound or look better than humans. And
that's fair. Okay. I am feeling a bit for people that actually invested a lot of time to learn certain technique. Right? They spend a lot, and then AI comes along and can do that technique like flawlessly, effortlessly. It's so that's kind of that can happen. I don't really know, how to go about that, and I also feel that the artists are kind of also pushed to explore a bit new boundaries, not only with art, but like more entrepreneurial stuff. And how do I organize? How do I find? So it's not just the creative part. Yeah, that's interesting. Maybe you should have an artist around this on your podcast to see their vision.
That would be super
interesting. Yeah.
And maybe then the opposite spectrum, which is like, what do you think about military?
Given the examples that are going on right now, that I was actually quite surprised, almost shocked by, and just to give a few, like at the borders,
Sure.
and it's not only U.S. border, it's also European border. It's also like the many immigration borders where the immigration is high. The immigrants, especially the refugees, they've become like AI test subjects, right? You have the AI surveillance towers, you have robot dogs, you have that their biometric data can be taken to do the DNA analysis with AI. And you don't know, do they know that their data is going to be used for that? Do they have no other choice? Otherwise, they won't be let in the country while they're running from war. You know, is it like actually a consent, or is it like you don't know the situation? Because when you're a refugee, you're in a survival mode. You don't think about AI potentially doing stuff. And initially this felt for me like, okay, they bring it really, we're protecting our borders. Like we're protecting our country. That's all fine. But then, now because the enemy is now outside of our country, right? And we're protecting our borders. So we have to use AI to experiment with that. Okay, and now how long will take before you say, okay, now the enemy is in the country. Now we have our own police having the robot dogs for everyone. You know, like, I don't know, where is this border? You know, where is this boundary? That's something that I don't have answers to yet, but I know it's happening. And the thing that shocked me most, given European Commission, given the European Union and the AI Act, and the fact that they have a list of high-risk and prohibited technologies that they're not allowed to, and then finding out that European Union, or I don't know if you're experimenting themselves with AI lying detectors, you know, that kind of strikes me like, okay, so AI Act holds, but it doesn't hold for immigrants. Like, what are you saying here? Like, it's a bit of a, I don't know.
Well, but that's sadly nothing new. Like, all of the things that, for example, pharmacists are not allowed to try in Europe, it's not uncommon for them to test it in South America or Africa or whatever they manage to do it. So it's just an evolution of that same principle of, we are not allowed to treat European citizens this way. Let's see where else we can test all of this stuff.
Yeah, so there is still like this we them thing, which is, maybe it's logical if you have a country that you have that. Because on one hand, I think the bigger issues we're facing might need a more global coordination, might actually need to be letting go of we them, and how can we make this happen just for, human being as species, but it might be a bit too far-fetched. It's really asking for a lot. It's a tough one. But that's, on one way it scares me, because you see what it can do to population when you're less advantage and more advantage with AI. Like, I think we've seen a couple of very recent in the news. Then the person that has the AI to test becomes like this bully, you know? Yeah, are we ethical still then? can we say that? Because
Tricky.
we agreed killing people is not okay. It didn't stop us to have wars. We still have them. Yeah.
So it's crazy because what I'm getting from this whole conversation is that at a personal level, you do have the responsibility of setting down your moral boundaries and try to adhere by them. Also, be always up to just see what's happening with AI and how that can affect you. But ultimately, solving this requires teams. You mentioned at an organization scale, like you need to assemble a team with everything from data management, legal, at C-level, at owner, somebody that knows. But then that keeps on scaling all the way to at a governmental level, and then even as a human problem.
This is a bit the reason that it reminds me of the nuclear weapon type of geopolitical situation, because when technology has this type of power, it starts a race. We see that race with the big tech, but we see this race also in a country level, right? I think already Dutch government also said like not investing in AI is not an option, because if we don't do it, then China will do it, or America, the same type of race. So yes, like with nuclear weapons, although with AI is less obvious because you have it in your pocket, and AI makes better AI. Nuclear weapons don't do that, but they're more. The damage is more vivid from a nuclear weapon. So then you had really that situation where the big powers came and this new world order was established. About regulation of nuclear weapons. Something like that I would expect with AI. Only the thing is, it moves so much more faster that we can actually gather our forces to realize, because it's less vivid. And that's kind of what it reminds me a bit of.
I think it's I think it's worse because the average person doesn't have access to nuclear power, but
it's worse because it's in everybody's
the
pocket.
average crazy person that really knows how to program can create some sort of open source program from their own basement.
And open source in development is not the same as open source in use. So once those super smart models are out of the box, there's no way to putting them in. And this is also, I think, a part of responsibility that we carry. But I cannot keep on blaming the big tech companies, because there's also a lot of good they brought. It's really the fact, like, how do we make sure that that their incentives change? Because it might be different incentive if you're like, hey, you're really responsible for the product you're delivering, and otherwise you're liable. Maybe they will invest more in safety in that sense. Maybe they take a bit the time to actually make sure the safety component is okay. But right now it's not the focus. The focus is elsewhere. And that's the bigger picture again. But then drilling it down to my own work, I also feel like, I carry a responsibility as a professional in the field. I'm advising people about this. I also have to advise about the fact that they should do it properly. And all of us actually have that responsibility. Yeah.
For sure. Maybe lowering the scale. Mm-hmm. I think we talk about AI at a global level. Yeah. But there is one thing I'm really curious about. I know that somewhere, maybe a couple of years back, you helped Xebia creating a policy for how to use LLMs.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a bit more about it? I'm curious.
Of course. Yeah, we did one at Xebia. I did also a couple at the clients, and they all have a different perspective and different angle. I think that's nice in being involved to multiple different policies to see how it actually can be stated. As for Xebia as consultants, it's also a bit different because it's a different line of business. You deal with people. As like average users, but at the same time you also have the project and the client and the specific maybe agreements that you need to make with the client about whether or not you're using Gen AI in the project or something like that, or consent. While at the same time, because we are more of a tech company, we are more aware of how it can be used or misused. So there's also maybe less need to really drill it down to all the nitty-gritty details. Well, you still do it because you also have your staff functions and HR and stuff. But essentially, what would you want to know about it? How it is set up, or like? Yeah,
because I think for a lot of people listening, this is either relevant right now or it will be in some years. Like, let's say you're the head of data management or the head of compliance or legal, and you really want to create a policy towards using something, let's say ChatGPT. How does that even go?
So I think it starts really with the context of your organization. And I would like to answer this question from one hand, Xebia as an example, and the other hand, one of my clients, which was a bank, because it's a different environment. So that will show you what it determines. Because when you're a bank, but in general, like the word policy, it has a bit of a different connotation, as I understood. So if you call it a policy, you need to also prove it that you're actually enforcing it. And you need to prove that you have this mechanism. So it requires a bit more work. So then in the bank, people were like, yeah, let's just call it mandatory guidelines, because there are guidelines, but no, we will still want to say that they're mandatory. So a lot of discussion there, like how do we position it? But the setup was more like, okay, if you're using open source tools like ChatGPT, consider if you're using like more of a RAG type of solutions, so it's more of a solution type. It was very per type of solution that exists and what would hold then. While and it was more imposing. While in Xebia it was more okay. We start with an intention. Is the intention just inspiration? Go ahead, do whatever you need. Just be aware that, your input can be somebody else's output, and don't put, sensitive data, personal stuff, like that's like the standard. But if your intention is to in any way use it in like project artifacts, then a different process needs to be followed. And in some of the cases, like you need like a contractual agreement with your client that you're going to use this type of tools. But most of the cases they're for inspiration. And then, you don't use, you don't do copy paste. You have because that's your value as a consultant. It's not about generating content. It's about reviewing it and making it better. So, yeah, it's a different angle.
Even let's say that I'm interested in using like AI, the artifacts, use them at a client.
Okay.
What do I have to even pay attention to or agree with them?
So that's really about then again that particular context and there different considerations. Are we, then we need to disclose this part of the content has been generated. That there may be certain. It also depends. Does it regard the code or does it regard like an image? Like what are we actually talking about? Because with the code you might have maybe more risk of copyright infringement that you want to cover, and then you have more think like. Okay, let's take a license. So then you promote, let's say if you're using GitHub Copilot, okay, you need to do it on an enterprise license, and the filter configuration needs to happen on an enterprise level so that you don't have this risk, somebody configured it properly, somebody not. So then you already minimize the risk of copyright infringement, for example. And there is still a little risk, but it's so little you can take the decision to accept that, for example. Depends on the organization, again. And that will also determine the ecosystem, because if you're dealing with patient data, for example, in the medical sector, it's much more strict. You're much more in the defense side, right? Yeah. But if it's just a retailer type of client, it matters less. So it's very much the ecosystem determines a lot of the choices that need to be made there. But there are certain topics that you just go through, like the copyright infringement, the transparency obligations, like things like that.
Of course, like I was well aware of many of them, but the one that I never thought is, yes, it's kind of a good idea to disclose what was generated with AI and how much.
Yeah, for example. So you need to, I usually always do it in the presentations that I say, like, hey, this image is generated with DALL-E or something, or just for, feels right.
Oh. Yeah. Then for the record, the song that you hear at the beginning of this podcast was made with AI.
Because it's like, that's also a question. Like, of course, we didn't have the right to privacy before cameras came everywhere, right? Or we didn't have the right to be forgotten. With this voice replications, I also wonder, will it lead to the right to your own voice or something like that? Or maybe at some point the right to your own face? I don't know. It can get very crazy.
It's interesting because me personally, I'm maybe a bit pessimist. I think, like, if you're an actor, if you are a musician and you notice that people are using your voice, you just have to deal with that. You have to create music that sounds more organic, more human-made, do a lot of concerts, have a more personal contact with your fans. That is something that AI cannot generate. And that is fine, because most of the people that are currently being affected by this already have some experience. Like, for example, me, like, sure, AI is able to do a lot of the coding that I would have to do and remember and triple check the documentation. So that's fine, but I already have experience and I'm well established and I'm more able to understand where the advice that AI is giving me is good and when it's bad.
Yeah.
But I'm always like so worried about the people that are entering the workforce
Yes.
right now,
And just learning the experience, yeah.
because many of them, being very honest, it does take this. Let's focus on programming to keep it easy. I think it takes around 3 to 5 years programming to be better than ChatGPT or Cloud. And the people that are just entering the workforce, they don't have those 3 years. So I guess a lot of companies are not even going to give them the chance because they're not better. But that's ultimately going to create like a generational gap of people that are not getting trained to be the people correcting AI tomorrow.
And at the same time, AI is also getting better.
Yeah.
It's. I think there is a balance to be strike there in general, like because right now we're really focusing a lot on productivity mainly, like how can AI increase productivity. But there may be so much more to discover. Why only productivity? Like, what else can be done? Like, just, let your kids out. I don't know. It's, there's... it's just... Specifically with programming, then maybe, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, productivity, but I saw a tweet the other day that I really hope they make AI that does your laundry and cleans your house and...
So that I can do the creative stuff, right?
Focus
Something
on
like
the
that.
tasks that really nobody wants to do.
Yeah, it's... I've this thought that I'm thinking of how that would...
Maybe we're almost at the end. So to close, I would like to ask you, what are the tips that you would give somebody that aspires to become a data strategist in this space of responsible AI?
Okay. Okay. That's very specific, but I think in general, and that would hold even more general than that. Like you should at least have a good sense of understanding who you are as a person. What is your minimum acceptable standard? What are your own values? Because that's where it starts, right? As if you're gonna preach people about responsible, you need to understand, what do you mean by responsible? What do you mean by ownership? What does that mean to you? And another one would be, to me, it's really that realization of you're actually part of it. Like, you should dare to ask the tough questions, even though they feel a bit tough, whether they're about the organization. Because if you don't dare to ask them, and your organization doesn't have that culture of having these questions asked that touch upon the ethical considerations, then maybe you're in the right organization. You're to foster that ethical awareness culture. It should be okay within the organization to ask this type of questions. It should not be like, oh, you've put in a corner because you're questioning some things, or you're questioning authority. Like, that's not the culture you want to find yourself in. You want that it's okay within that culture to address these issues. I think that they're really where it starts. Knowing yourself, so that's the first one. Second one, daring to ask these questions. I think these two.
Okay, so it's interesting because I mean it's confronting that you have to think about your ethical stand.
It is.
You have to be very open about it, and you of course have to follow whatever you preach on a day-to-day basis. But at the same time, you also have to be the type of person that is not afraid to tell the CEO, tell the people that you don't care if they're gonna lose a lot of money, that the principles are always on top.
And then it's also, what is your alternative, right? If you really want to, because for me, like you said, you tend to be pessimistic. Oftentimes, I feel like, oh my God, why am I even doing this? Like, it's so hopeless. What am I even trying to, And then my husband goes like, do you think anybody who's ever tried to create some type of change in the world didn't start in a hopeless situation? So then what? You give up just at the beginning? Like, you're right. Actually, let's not give up to begin with. Like, I'm not going to change the world all by myself, but I do believe, specifically within Netherlands, we might create a substantial ripple effect for people to start thinking about it. It's just all it needs is at some point a critical mass of people understanding, the reality of things at that point. So then it feels like, whatever ripple effect I can cause along, everything is welcome. You cannot do everything by yourself. Yeah.
So that's a good message. If you care about this topic, not only because you're a data strategist, but maybe because you know what your company is doing, you know what the government is doing, or what one of the organizations that you care about is doing, don't be discouraged.
Yeah, it seems very inevitable, but like you still have what can you still affect? I think that's at the end the question. And it's also, it goes for every generation, right? Every generation solves the problem of that generation, and with the solutions, new problems arise. And that's, if everybody just focuses on their own niche of the problems, it's simply said than done, but I think we should be okay.
Okay, and with that, let's say positive, neutral,
Yes.
chaotic, neutral note, I think we can close. Mariam, thank you so
Thank
much.
you
It's
too,
been
Juan.
a
Thank
super
you.
interesting episode.
The same for me. Thanks for being here.